This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
This is Dan Damon with your World Update Daily Commute, recorded on Wednesday at 5:30 a.m. US East Coast time. Coming up, Cuba says it did send weapons to North Korea through the Panama Canal. They were going for repair. How parents in China are taking the health of their children into their own hands following a spate of food contamination scandals.
The government hasn't taken any measures to deal with the food scandals. You have to pay to find the best food for your child.
Memories from a different kind of summer camp.
North Korea was a hospitable country. People in general are very friendly. They're experiencing some difficulties, but they love their leaders and they hope that their leaders are going to help them.
And how to store all the world's knowledge for millions of years. After the news.
BBC News. Violent protests have taken place in the Indian state of Bihar over the deaths of at least 20 children who fell ill after eating a free school meal. Crowds armed with sticks attacked police vehicles in the city of Chhapra, where some of the children were taken to hospital. Dozens are still being treated. Some are in a critical condition. A special tribunal in Bangladesh has sentenced an Islamist leader to death for war crimes dating back to the War of Independence from Pakistan more than 40 years ago. Ali Ahsan Mohammed Mujahid was found guilty of 5 charges, including abduction and murder. He's the second senior figure from the Jamaat-e-Islami party to be convicted by the tribunal this week. On Monday, the party's former leader was jailed. The Cuban government has acknowledged that a North Korean ship seized in Panama was carrying hundreds of tons of Cuban-owned weapons, but the Foreign Ministry said the cargo consisted of obsolete Soviet-era anti-aircraft batteries, missiles and 2 aircraft. It said they'd been sent to North Korea for repair before being returned to Havana. On the eve of Nelson Mandela's 95th birthday, one of his granddaughters has told the BBC how difficult it's been for his family to cope with his critical condition. Ndeleka Mandela said some questions concerning the condition of the former South African president were intrusive. The Chinese authorities have detained a prominent human rights activist, Xu Jiyong, who's campaigned for officials to disclose their assets. He was held on suspicion of gathering people to disturb public order, but no reason was given for the charge. A woman who owns a bar in Japan is suing the head of the country's biggest organised crime group, the Yamaguchi Gumi, for the return of protection money she paid to local gangsters in Nagoya. She argues that Japan's biggest crime boss bears ultimate responsibility for her costs. BBC News.
This is World Update from the BBC World Service in London. I'm Dan Damon. Cuba has confirmed a North Korean cargo ship seized in Panama was carrying missiles and fighter jets. They were loaded in Cuban ports. Cuba says they were obsolete weapons being sent for repair. Panamanian authorities stopped the freighter on Monday. Weaponry was found hidden amongst a shipment of sugar. Well, a Foreign Ministry statement has been read out on Cuban TV.
El Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores desea informar. And
the Foreign Ministry is informing the world that a ship did indeed leave a Cuban port for the People's Democratic Republic of Congo. The cargo predominantly made of 10 tons of sugar, but also 240 metric tons of obsolete defensive weaponry, 2 Volga and Pechora anti-aircraft missiles, rockets in parts and pieces, MiG planes, and 15 plane motors, all of them made in the middle of the last century, to be repaired and returned to our country. Well, in several parts of the world, a collective possibly. Lucy Williamson is in Seoul, and you've been looking at some of the background about a visit from North Korea to Cuba recently.
Yes, I was looking into the background relationship between Cuba and North Korea because it isn't a relationship that's really hit the headlines very much in the last few years. And reading the North Korean state media, I found a couple of visits by North Korean military officials over the past few months to Cuba, the most recent one at the beginning of July, and a very short news bulletin just talking about their talks on boosting friendly relations between the two armies, talked about the comradely relationship the two countries have, and just looking a little bit more into that relationship, it does seem to have been very close for quite a long time, at least in public. Lots of public support for each other between these two nations, and they do share an awful lot, of course, but perhaps more superficial than real substance, according to most analysts, which is what makes this incident so interesting, because it isn't something that was particularly expected.
What's been the reaction there in South Korea?
The South Korean authorities are very much saying that similar sounds to what's coming out of the US. They're saying they want to investigate further to make absolutely sure what's going on. It's a very serious issue, if indeed it is what it looks to be, because, of course, all weapons shipments to and from North Korea, except for small arms, are banned under 3 separate UN Security Council resolutions. So if indeed Cuba has been sending weapons to and from North Korea, that could land it in some trouble.
I suppose in one way this indicates that the weaponry that both have, Cuba and North Korea, is pretty old, and they need to cannibalize the parts for each other.
Well, that's right, and that's what makes this quite interesting. As I say, despite the close political relationship between Cuba and North Korea, both existing communist regimes, both have survived the fall of the Soviet Union, both are under sanctions from the United States, there hasn't really been much practical links that have been seen between the two. The economies of both are too small to really be of interest to each other, especially given the big distances involved. And so the military cooperation is an interesting one because, as you say, they both built their armies on the back of Soviet equipment, and for 20 years now those supplies have been unavailable. So what analysts here in Seoul are saying is that if indeed North Korea is looking to Cuba for this kind of cooperation, it may indicate that North Korea is struggling to keep up repairs on its military hardware. That could be because it hasn't got supplies coming in for 20 years or more from the Soviet Union anymore, but also because sanctions may be hitting it quite hard. And both those things are interesting as far as analysts are concerned when they're trying to ascertain how strong North Korea's military is.
Lucy, thanks very much indeed. Lucy Williamson in Seoul, South Korea. In China, another week, another food scandal. So it seems Chinese citizens fed up with contaminated food, milk powder, poisonous rice, fake food. So how are citizens dealing with it? Well, they're coming up with their own solutions, as Celia Hatton reports from Beijing.
In a tiny apartment in Beijing, a 1-year-old boy nicknamed Hu Hu plays with his doting parents. It's a happy scene. But venture near the family's kitchen, where Hu Hu's doting grandmother cooks his meals, and you'll learn more about the concerns this family carry for their only child. Endless problems with China's locally produced food have bred a deep suspicion of what's sold on Chinese store shelves, explains Hu Hu's mother, Liang Jinfang.
The government hasn't taken any measures to deal with the food scandals. You have to pay to find the best food for your child.
Box by box, a year's supply of baby formula has arrived at the apartment, shipped straight from Germany.
We spent so much on milk powder that my parents have to help us with our living costs so we can survive.
But it's no wonder these parents and millions like them are worried. In 2008, crowds formed outside children's hospitals across China like this one in Beijing. 6 babies died and 300,000 others were sickened after drinking milk formula laced with melamine, an industrial chemical. Just this year, market-goers in China were shocked when more than 900 people were arrested for crimes across the country involving fake meat, including rat illegally substituted for mutton.
So most people living in China come up with their own personal ways to cope with the constant threat of contaminated food. I'm holding my smartphone here, and I'm looking at a popular new application. It's just one of a few that allow users to swap tips on the latest food safety scandals. Here's an alert warning me that a man was arrested in China's central Hunan province after selling bean sprouts that were dyed with industrial bleach.
But lingering concerns over contaminated food are driving business at this private laboratory in Beijing's northern suburbs. Workers are busy filling orders at the Zhiyunda Science and Technology Company. Originally, researchers here targeted their instant food safety tests to companies and government agencies. But now, ordinary consumers are snapping up their wares.
Okay, so he's taking a little dropper full of milk.
The company's most popular test?
And adding 1, 2...
No surprise, it's a 3-minute detector that looks for contaminants in baby formula.
Oh, wait. Okay.
The lab now sells more than 150 different products, explains the company's deputy general manager, Li Jiangang.
Whenever a food safety problem pops up, we produce a matching solution. We have duck meat that is disguised as lamb. We have testers for that now too.
But on the other side of the city, Hu's family sits down to lunch. It's hard to imagine a test that would convince these parents to shop locally. Even the rice, the most Chinese of foods their son eats, is imported from Germany.
Celia Hatton reporting from Beijing. Scientists at the University of Southampton in England have created a storage system that could survive the human race using something that looks a bit like Superman's memory crystals with ultra-fast lasers. They can store data to withstand temperatures of 1,000 degrees Celsius and last 1 million years. Technology journalist Rupert Goodwin's told me how data is currently stored.
Lots of it's stored on optical discs, sort of the equivalent of the sort of Blu-ray that you have in your front room. And a lot is stored on good old-fashioned tape, which is still one of the best ways to store data over a long period that there is. So the old Hollywood idea of tapes whizzing around in the background is still with us.
And is that secure, though? Fire, I would have thought, would be a damage. You know, your Blu-ray can melt, your tape can break.
First of all, yes, it is insecure to physical damage if there's an earthquake or a building catches fire. It also degrades over time, even if you keep it very well. Blu-ray's only got a limited lifespan of perhaps 15 years or so. So unless you go back and keep looking at it, then fairly soon it's just a pile of digital dust.
Let's hear from Jingyu Zhang. He is a professor at Southampton University in the south of England. Obviously, he's from China originally, and he has been researching new ways, much more secure ways of securing huge amounts of data. I asked him about that.
We are using a high-capacity memory, which can last potentially 1 million years. So once you write, you don't need to rewrite every 20 years and don't need to consider the environment of storing it. It will be safe and secure.
And it uses crystal?
Yeah, silica glass.
And how do you write on the silica glass?
We are using ultra-fast laser, high-technology laser.
And how quickly will this be in commercial capacity, commercial production?
So we are looking for industrial partner currently, hopefully in several years. I mean, people are always talking about asteroid hitting Earth, Noah's Ark. I mean, we can achieve that. We can pass over knowledge and science to the mankind who survived and carry on over civilization, I mean.
Or indeed to the aliens who find our destroyed
that will be a problem.
Of course, that's not the only reason for storing huge amounts of data, is so that when we destroy the planet, somebody else can pick up and they can still read Shakespeare. But Rupert Goodwin's technology journalist, there must be lots of people looking for better ways of storing into much longer-term futures.
Well, yes, because it's simply very expensive to have to keep recycling your data, to read it, make sure it's there, and write it back again. So anyone who's interested in keeping huge amounts of data, which these days is almost everybody, so their commercial interest in spotting long-term trends, being able to mine back into the past and find out what happened then, so you can predict it in the future.
We're worried at the moment, aren't we, that security agencies around the world are keeping huge amounts of our personal data and listening to our phone calls and storing them. Are they doing that recycling thing? Do they have to worry that all the data they're keeping is going to degrade?
It's not so important to them because, in general, the older intelligence is, the less valuable it is. So if they've got stuff that goes back 10 years, that's more than good enough for them. I mean, at the moment, the amount of data being produced is huge. It's something like 250,000 novels of data for every person on the planet being produced this year, and it'll probably be twice that next year.
What other technologies are being researched? I've heard of bubble storage, for example.
Well, bubble storage is actually quite an old one. It happened in the 70s, and it was quite cute. Little bubbles of magnetic memory on garnet crystals, and it's all very, very Star Trek and science fiction. One of the best permanent ones I've seen is using X-ray lasers to etch pictures onto plates of very hard metal, which is great if you've got an X-ray laser, and that can last for tens of millions of years too. But mostly we're looking at, for practical use, things like atomic level, where we're manipulating single atoms, perhaps electronic level, where we're manipulating single electrons, moving single electrons in and out of tiny holes in matter, which sounds equally Star Trek, but will probably be here in about 15 years.
How impressed are you by Professor Zhang's laser, superfast laser?
This is something people have been looking for a long time, since the 50s. I'm not sure it's going to be here that quickly, but it's very impressive work. It needs to be done, and I'm glad he's done it.
Technology journalist Rupert Goodwins, and before him, Professor Jingyu Zhang. This is World Update.
Hello, Mother. Hello, Father. Here I am at Camp Granada.
Yeah, Alan Sherman and Hello Mother Had a Father about summer camp, an annual rite of passage in North America, but summer camp exists in North Korea too. And I've been speaking to a young Russian woman, Valentina Boltasheva, who spent a few weeks at the Songdo-won International Children's Camp in Wonsan in the north. She started by telling me about the happy times.
Получается, сам лагерь расположен на берегу моря. The
camp is on the sea, so every day we were able to swim and have fun on the beach. It is about 50 meters from the sea. We swam every day. We had animators who entertained us. We built sand sculptures. There was a big lake as well, and it had a slide, and we could slide down it straight into the water. I remember these moments.
How obviously North Korean was it? How much of Kim Il-sung, how much Juche, this kind of self-reliance movement, was obvious?
Мы видели на улице каждый день почти что пионеров.
On the streets we saw the pioneers. In every room we went, at the hotel, at the camp, there were portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. On all streets, everywhere, there were portraits of North Korean leaders. The people are very patriotic. Almost every day we saw people go to memorials and monuments to lay flowers and sing patriotic songs. It was very unusual for me.
How did it happen that you went to this North Korean summer camp?
Моя мама работает на авиастроительном заводе.
My mother works at an aircraft manufacturing factory, which is supported by the state and local authorities. The local government wanted to support and encourage the workers of the factory and offered around 30 holiday coupons to the children of the workers. Everyone had to fill in a questionnaire, answering questions about the history of North Korea and about the history of the factory where my mother works. I successfully answered all the questions and was selected as one of the 30 people.
Have you been able to keep in touch with any of the friends you made when you were at the camp?
Нет, у меня не получалось, потому что в Северной Корее проблемы с интернетом.
No, I wasn't able to. In North Korea there is a problem with the internet, and 5 years ago I also had problems with the internet. To call on the phone is expensive, so we were friends at the camp, but afterwards our communication stopped.
The reputation of North Korea around the world, and it's probably our fault as media, but the reputation of North Korea is that it's crazy Kims with nuclear weapons. What do you think of North Korea?
Мне показалось, что Корея довольно-таки гостеприимная страна.
I thought North Korea was a hospitable country. We were well received, we always had entertainment, we were well treated, and the food was quite good. And people in general are very friendly. You can tell that they're experiencing some difficulties, but they're trying to overcome them. They love their leaders, and they hope that their leaders are going to help them.
Would you like to go back?
Да, возможно, я бы хотела вернуться и посмотреть, что изменилось.
Yes, possibly. I would like to go back and see what has changed and what hasn't. Maybe for a week. I would like to go and see.
Valentina Boltacheva, who spent a few weeks at a summer camp in North Korea. That's a view you so rarely hear, that people would like to go there for holidays. You're listening to World Update from London. Headlines from our newsroom. Violent protests in Bihar state in India following the deaths of at least 20 children who were poisoned by their school lunch. And the Cuban government says a North Korean ship seized by Panama was carrying weapons to be repaired in North Korea and returned to Cuba. Those are the top stories. On the eve of Nelson Mandela's 95th birthday, his first granddaughter has told the BBC how difficult it's been for the family to cope with his critical illness, and about the recent dispute with her cousin that resulted in the exhumation of family remains. In a rare interview, Ndileka Mandela, an intensive care nurse by profession, spoke in Johannesburg to the BBC's Milton Nkosi. He begins his report with an update on the latest on Nelson Mandela's condition.
What we know is that Mr. Mandela is still stable but in a critical condition in a hospital in Pretoria. Remember, he was admitted last month, over a month ago. It's now 5 weeks. He went in on the 8th of June, and his birthday is on Thursday, July 18th. There has been some talk that he might be discharged if he feels better, of course, which is a question I asked Ndileka Mandela, his granddaughter. But first we started looking at the pictures in her home where Mr. Mandela is seen sitting with her around a table. And behind that picture, I saw another one of Mr. Mandela with Mrs. Obama as when she was visiting her in 2011. So beautiful pictures on display at Ndileka Mandela's home, and we were looking at them, and then I asked her about plans for the birthday, if at all.
Actually, I was asking him, who is this handsome man over here? And he was, that's why he's smiling, yeah. That's why he's smiling, yeah.
He's looking good.
He's looking good, he's looking good. Well, the end goal has always been like, we would like him to go home eventually. But we can't rush his state of health because of succumbing to pressure of people wanting him to be home during his birthday. If needs be that he's in hospital during this time, by all means he'll still be in hospital.
This must be a difficult time for the family. How are you coping?
It's been hard. It's been hard considering the fact that we're doing things in the public eye. You know, you don't have moments of reflection. You walk out the hospital, you get your picture snapped at, you know, and going through this period, ordinary people don't go through it. They go through it in the privacy of their own homes. But unfortunately for us, it's something in the public platform, which has not been easy.
But there is a certain degree of recognition that the world is very interested in your grandfather because he's so loved across the planet.
You know, we understand it, but nonetheless, we've never had him. And even now, when we think that perhaps this may be his last days or his twilight years, you know, because we don't know when anything can happen, it's only in God's hands, that we still don't have him to ourselves. There's still that intrusion. Because when he came out of prison, we didn't have time to spend with him because he was busy with the affairs of the country and of the world.
What sort of questions do people ask, for example, that the family finds offensive?
Some people would ask, you know, is it over yet? Give us the details. Is he on life support? Is he talking? You know, those kind of questions. I think those are too intrusive.
Also, you unfortunately have to deal with the family feud that has come out so publicly in the newspapers. How are you dealing with that?
You know, Milton, to say it's a feud, it's a misnomer, because never before has our family been united. What happened with the Greys was unfortunate, and it is something that we did not want to take in the public space, but because of who we are, it did spill over to the public space.
One of the people who had to be reburied in Kunu was your father. Mm-hmm. How difficult was that for you?
It was. One day I started to write in my journal of what the emotions that were going through me during that time, and I haven't been able to put pen to paper because it's just too overwhelming and too sore and heartbreaking. Rebury my father yet again because he was buried in Johannesburg, taken to Kunu, and so it's been a painful experience for me.
And if you had to say anything to your cousin Mandla, who's been involved in this saga for the last few weeks, what would you say to him?
You know, family will always be family. They say blood is thicker than water. And, you know, I would be like, unlike granddad, to say I'm forgiving. And the Bible even says that you forgive your enemies, people that trespass against you 70 times. And Mandla is my blood. There's no way that I can never forgive him. It's just that right now I'm still hurting.
That's Ndleka Mandela, who is the first granddaughter of Nelson Mandela, speaking to the BBC's Milton Nkosi in Johannesburg. Let's turn to the situation in Greece once more. Parliament due to vote in a few hours on austerity legislation that could leave thousands of public sector workers facing imminent redundancy. We can speak to Andreas Adrianopoulos. He's a former minister in the Greek government. Now he runs the Institute for Diplomacy in Athens. Thanks for being with us on World Update. What might happen? How many jobs, what kind of jobs could go if this bill passes?
Well, the moment the bill will pass, there's not going to be a large number of jobs going because there's going to be a movement from one kind of employment to another. For example, policemen in the municipal services will be incorporated into the state sector, you know, in the police force. Others also will go to, some teachers will move from one kind of employment to another. The ones who are going to lose their jobs are the ones who we call school guard, the ones who are being employed to guard schools in the evenings. And the number of those is not very large. I think it's around 2,000 or 3,000. And of course, they are employed by local government as well. The issue in Greece is that the government is not daring to cut down on the public sector. So what they do is basically they are cutting down jobs in peripheral sort of semi-public entities like local government, municipal services and things like this. While many people believe that they should have cut down there are many public sector entities which have been established in the last 8-9 years, and they don't offer anything to the society at large. And they should have started from those. Unfortunately, they don't do that because obviously the main public sector is colonized by cadres of the two main political parties, and of course they don't dare touch them.
Well, can they then remove the number of jobs from the public pay sector in order to save the money that the Troika has told them to save?
Well, this should have been the idea, but unfortunately they don't do that. The ministers have admittedly said that they have admitted that there's not going to be any fiscal repercussions in making these people redundant, because they will transfer them to other kind of employment. Simply they do it as on principle to show that public sector jobs are not sacred. This is not a bad idea as such, but I don't think that they're going to have any impact on the economics of the country.
So what comes next then? Because the money's going to run out. The bailout may not be enough.
This is exactly the issue. The consecutive Greek governments in the last 3 years, they opt for the easy option, which is, just raise taxation and cut down pensions and salaries. And of course, raising taxation doesn't offer larger revenues now because there are no money available. The only thing that can be done would have been to cut down on public sector entities which are not useful. And in this way, they should really reduce the public sector spending. But unfortunately, they don't do that because they don't want to lose votes.
It sounds alarming. Thanks very much indeed for giving us your view on that. Andreas Andrianopoulos from the Institute for Diplomacy in Athens. Lots of wonderful descriptions of places of worship, including by those who don't actually worship there. They just like the spaces. I asked for pictures. We haven't had any of those yet, so please if you can, post a picture. I'm sure you can do that. I also asked on the Dan Damon Journalist page about sign-offs. Ozzy Osbourne says, when I'm signing off my email, I put 5 or more spaces before my name as per the Telegraph regulations for a signature in a telegram. Who knew? Well, Ozzy did. I feel email, he says, is the direct linear descendant of the telegram. Fascinating. Join us tomorrow for more.